Have you been making money on player cards? Have you been losing money on player cards? Maybe you've done a little bit both. Let's talk about it in this video. So player to be booked or player to receive a card is something that we added relatively recently at Bookie Bashing, certainly at the size of the content that we have just now. And we had a lot of feedback in August, September, October from people thanking us because they made quite a lot of money, both at the exchanges and at soft online bookmakers who were taking the bets. And then the opposite happened. December, January, we've had a lot of people ask us, is something wrong? People have been losing money. They want a bit of reassurance that their strategy isn't incorrect or the model hasn't fallen over. Now, the model is the same model all the way through. So let's talk about the strategy. Here is a real betting history, soft online bookmakers, for a strategy to win £200 on each bet throughout the season, September through to January 2025. And we see this long winning run. And then we see this fairly significant, quite quick losing run. And that experience has been witnessed by quite a number of people. And empirically, what I've heard is the operators got really hit at the beginning of the season. It's not helped by the acquisition of SpreadX and Sporting Index because soft online bookmakers, the odds compilers, tend to take their odds from the spreads. And before, maybe one spread would have an incorrect price and one would have a correct price, and sharp players could middle them, and they would notice that they were being middled because there would be more money coming in for those particular players, and they would sharpen their lines as a result of that. But now there's only the one company, that middling doesn't happen. There's a few more, if you like, incorrect, out there, wild lines going on at the spreads, which are being copied over in to the soft online bookmakers. Now, a lot of soft online bookmakers only offer one side. They only offer the over. And towards the beginning of the season, sharp players were absolutely hammering those soft online bookmakers, perhaps a little bit with the help of Bookie Bashing's player stats tool, compounding players to be booked into multiples that were all coming in. People were cleaning up. They were making a lot of money. Bookmakers got stung. They had to do something. So first of all, they added a lot more margin to these over-only bets, to the yes side. If you're only offering the yes and not the no, then you just add so much more margin to the yes. And if you are offering both, you perhaps offer a completely neutral EV on the no, because few people are betting the no at 1.1. They're more likely to be betting the yes if it's 10% to happen, because you're getting those 9-1 odds with the margin applied. So the bookmakers, they started applying a little bit more margin. But is that the only reason why people are losing? Well, let's have a look at the secondary graph here. If I just remove this one and we'll go to this one. This is the market-wide expectation of cards against the number reported, the results in the English Premier League, the Championship, La Liga, League One, Bundesliga, and Serie A. So we're talking about good 50-odd games per weekend or twice a week or whatever. And at the start of the season, we're looking at about 4.32 in the expectation in the markets, which is an average. It's not just one place, it's an average. And we were getting 4.6. So if you're, the markets are putting it up at 4.3, there's nearly 10% more happening. They're getting absolutely stung. And this is an average, of course. When you're averaging things like this, you do this on one game, you're going to get stung. You average every game like this, you're really going to get stung. And actually, it got worse for them. It got worse because it went all the way up to about 4.66. Now, you can see from this orange line that the market started to correct, and that 4.3 average became 4.4. And then something happened in the actual football. Less yellow cards were being shown. We don't need to discuss why that was the case. Perhaps referees were being told too many yellows, whatever. But they started coming down from that high of 4.66, and they pretty much constantly come down all the way to 4.36, nearly to where this expectation started off at the beginning of the season. When it hit 4.5, that's where the market was efficient. It was expecting 4.5 cards per game. We were getting 4.5 cards per game. Everything was happy. But the market continued to overcorrect, predicting more and more cards to a high of about 4.54. And the results kept on coming down. And now you've got a gap on the other side, meaning the bookmakers are making a lot of money. Layers on the exchange are making money. Backers are making less money because backers are thinking that there's going to be, or at least the lines, the probability are saying that there's going to be 4.52 cards per game, and we're getting about 4.34. So what does all of this mean? I mean, in terms of goals, when you look at goals, they're very efficient, and match odds are very efficient. And if there's something as big as this, a difference between expectation and result in the goals markets, they get hit and they get corrected quite quickly. Less so in cards, which is why player stats is such a fantastic thing to be able to make money from. We have been chatting with some odds compilers who are modeling player cards themselves in-house and provide some of the biggest bookmakers in the world, you know, over in America, new contract over there, with probabilities for player cards. And they've seen the same thing. They've seen this overcorrection themselves. It's not really particularly healthy. As a bookmaker, you don't want this. You'd rather they were predicting 4.5 and they were getting 4.5, especially so they could offer less margin, making them more competitive, and they could offer both sides, something that they can't do just now when there's so much of a discrepancy. As advantage players, what can we do? Well, first of all, at bookie bashing, everybody gave us the feedback in August, September, October that they were making a lot of money from bookie bashing lines and they were thanking us. I'm going to put my hands up and say that was nothing to do with us. I'm glad you were making money. Glad those that were compounding the value into multiples were cleaning up. It wasn't bookie bashing. We were just using the market prices, and the markets were saying there were 4.3 cards per game and there were actually 4.6. So you were getting way more winners than the market predicted. Nothing to do with bookie bashing, right? And now some people are losing, backers are losing. And if I may, it's nothing to do with bookie bashing because the markets are predicting 4.52 cards per game. We're getting 4.34 cards per game. So we're getting fewer cards per game than the markets are predicting. What can we do about this? One thing we've wanted to do for a long time at bookie bashing, normalize player cards within a game so that the sum of the player cards that we're getting, at least for the starting players, equals the match expectancy. Really hard because so many cards go to bleeding subs. We're doing a huge project in the background about how many subs are getting cards. That's still a little bit away from completion, but what we're doing before then is we're actually adjusting what we're seeing in the market. So of course, we never price anything up from first principles. It's not what we do at bookie bashing. We follow the markets. We'll leave it to those odds compilers for the first principles works. Not that we couldn't do it, but it's a dangerous direction to get into. We prefer to use the markets. What we will do, though, is we'll review expectation against results a little bit more frequently, and we'll change and adjust certain biases that we're using from the markets to try and do the job for the markets that they should be doing themselves, get that expectation a little bit closer to reality. Because if you ask me, this downward trend doesn't look like it's stopped yet. The overcorrection of the prediction has stopped. It's tailed off at about 4.5. But how far down is this change in the number of cards per game going to go? We're going to get to 4.2. We're going to get to 4.1. There could be some directive going out to the bookmakers the referees going, you're issuing too many cards, issue fewer. And if that directive has gone out, that trend is going to keep on coming down. Well, the expectation can't lag too far behind that. And if it does, we're just going to try and narrow and close that gap at bookie bashing by adjusting certain assumptions that we have on things like margin, which we genuinely believe has tangibly changed over the last few weeks, biases, attributes like that. So if you're betting on player cards, just now, I hope you're laying. If you're not laying, I hope there's a significant amount of threshold applied to your EV. 1.01, 101% would be wild right now. But just also be aware that if you're winning, it's not necessarily anything to do with us and we're not taking credit for it. And if you're losing, there's probably things that you can be doing to either lose less or maybe even completely switch your strategy. And one thing I might recommend is constantly keeping an eye out on expectation versus results. How can I do that, you might ask? Well, we do log every single line that we have for expectations in our archive tool, and we also have a tool that provides results with players and whether they got a yellow card or not. So perhaps something that Bookie Bashing could do in the future is have this as kind of like live graph, this live graph comparing expectation versus results. And anytime the expectation is under, it's good for backers, and anytime the expectation is over results, it's good for layers. Maybe that's a barometer that would be useful, but that would be a long-term project. In the meantime, it's just good to keep an eye on these things and understand why we're winning, if we're winning, and why we're losing, if we're losing.